I had always loved my husband, Tund, with all my heart. From the very first moment we met at university, there was an undeniable connection between us that felt almost magical. Tund was the kind of man who could effortlessly draw people toward him with his charisma. His charm was magnetic, his confidence inspiring, and his energy seemed limitless. Whether he was sharing a funny story with friends or passionately debating a topic in class, he had this way of captivating everyone around him, including me. What started as casual conversations between lectures quickly grew into a close friendship. Over time, our bond deepened in ways I hadn't expected. He made me laugh, supported me through difficult times, and encouraged me to chase my dreams. Eventually, friendship blossomed into love. A love so strong that it felt like nothing in the world could ever shake it. We promised each other forever, exchanging vows in front of family and friends. With hope in our hearts and stars in our eyes, our marriage was filled with laughter, mutual respect, and an undeniable joy that seemed unbreakable. Yet, despite the happiness we shared, I sometimes found myself haunted by a small, unspoken question buried deep in the corners of my mind. Tund was a man full of passion and ambition, someone who threw himself completely into everything he cared about, including our intimate moments. He was eager, attentive, and loving, and while I cherished the closeness we shared, I occasionally found myself wondering about the depth of his affection. Would he still love me just as much if I couldn't meet his physical needs for a time? Would his unwavering passion turn into frustration if I needed space? These questions were not born out of insecurity, but rather from a quiet curiosity about the foundation of our relationship. I wanted to believe that our love went beyond the physical, that Tund loved me for who I was at my core, independent of the intimacy we shared. But I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt. Was our connection too heavily tied to the physical aspect of our relationship? This curiosity lingered in my heart for years, growing louder during the quieter moments of our marriage. It wasn't that Tund had ever given me a reason to doubt him, quite the opposite. He was always thoughtful and attentive, but there were times when I noticed how much he craved that connection. And I wondered, was his love for me deeper than just the closeness we shared as husband and wife? The thought became impossible to ignore. It wasn't that I wanted to test him out of suspicion or mistrust. I adored him too much for that. Rather, it felt like an opportunity to truly understand the depth of our bond. If I ever needed to take a step back from our physical relationship, could he still see me, value me, and cherish me for who I was as a person? The idea intrigued me, even as it terrified me. It wasn't about creating distance, it was about seeking clarity, about finding out if our love could thrive without that part of our relationship for a while. For months, I noticed a subtle distance between us that I couldn't explain. It wasn't a fight or even a specific disagreement, but a quiet realization that maybe we were drifting apart in a way I hadn't anticipated. After a particularly challenging conversation where I felt we didn't connect as I had hoped, I made a decision that filled me with both dread and determination. I would deny Tund my body for one entire week. It was a drastic choice, and I knew it. Tund was a passionate man, and I had always matched his energy. For us, physical intimacy wasn't just an act. It was a way of expressing our love, of reconnecting after long days. To take that away, even temporarily, felt like I was challenging the very foundation of our relationship. But I needed to know, would Tund, the man who adored me in so many ways, still be patient and understanding if I said no for a while? Could he value me without the intimacy we had always shared? That night, as we lay in bed, my heart raced. Tund reached out to me like he always did, his touch warm and familiar, a silent invitation to the closeness that had always come so naturally to us. But this time, I gently pulled away. Not tonight, Tund, I said softly, trying to mask the nervousness in my voice. He paused, his brow furrowing slightly in concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with genuine care. I nodded, placing a soft kiss on his cheek. "I'm fine," I reassured him. "I just need a little space tonight." His confusion was palpable, but he didn't press me. Instead, he gave a small nod, his lips curving into a hesitant smile as if to say, "I trust you." He shifted slightly, giving me room, and I turned over, staring into the darkness. My mind raced. Had I made the right decision? Would this test bring us closer? Or was I about to disrupt the harmony we had spent years building? The first night was the hardest. Tun's touch wasn't just a habit, it was his way of showing love. As his hand gently rested on my waist, I felt the weight of what I was doing. It wasn't just physical distance. I was stepping into unknown territory, risking the comfort we had built over the years. I could sense his hesitation, his quiet attempt to understand what had changed. He didn't say anything, but I could feel his questions hanging in the air. For a moment, I wanted to give in, to turn to him and reassure him that nothing was wrong. But I held my ground. Even as my chest tightened with guilt, Tun let out a soft sigh, a sound so gentle yet heavy with emotion. He turned over, his back to me, and I lay awake for hours, questioning myself. Was this a mistake? Could our love handle this challenge? Or was I pushing us into a rift I wouldn't know how to heal? As the week began, I realized that this was not just a test of Tun's love. It was also a test of my own strength. It was about understanding who we were as a couple, beyond the physical connection we had always leaned on. The journey ahead felt uncertain, but I held on to the hope that it would reveal something profound about the love we shared. A love that, I prayed, was stronger than I had ever imagined. The next morning, he didn't bring it up again. It was as if he had silently accepted my refusal, but I could sense an undercurrent of change. There was a subtle shift in the air between us, a distance that hadn't been there before. We still talked, still went through the motions of our daily lives, but something was undeniably different, a small, almost imperceptible crack in our usual rhythm. The second day mirrored the first in many ways, at least on the surface. In the morning, we sat across from each other at the dining table, sharing a quiet breakfast. Tun recounted a silly story from work, something about a colleague who had accidentally sent an email to the entire department, and we laughed together. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though everything was back to normal, like nothing had changed. But as the day unfolded, the undercurrent of tension became harder to ignore. It wasn't anything overt. Tun wasn't the type to voice his frustration so openly, but it was there in the subtleties of his behavior. His eyes lingered on me just a fraction longer than usual, especially when I moved around the room in a fitted dress. It wasn't a blatant stare, but the intensity in his gaze carried an unspoken weight. It wasn't just admiration, it was longing. A silent question hung in the air, one he didn't dare to articulate. Even his words took on a different texture. He began weaving in playful remarks and flirtatious comments, his tone laced with a quiet insistence. "You're looking extra fine today," he teased with a grin, his voice dipping into that familiar, soft register he used when trying to draw me closer. Normally, I would have responded with a coy remark or leaned into his touch, letting the moment unfold naturally. But this time, I simply smiled politely and redirected the conversation to something mundane, anything to steer us away from the growing tension. His reaction was subtle but unmistakable. There was a flicker of something in his expression, a momentary flash of confusion, perhaps even frustration, that he quickly masked. He didn't press further, but his silence spoke volumes. By the evening, the weight of the situation had begun to settle over us like an unwelcome guest. Tun didn't complain outright or demand answers, but his quiet unease was impossible to ignore. It revealed itself in the way he hovered near me, as if hoping I might reconsider. His laughter during our conversations felt forced, fading too quickly as though his mind was preoccupied with unspoken thoughts. The distance between us was no longer just a feeling, it was becoming a tangible presence. And yet, I held firm. This was a test. After all, a test not just for him but for us. I needed to know how deep our love truly ran, whether it could withstand the absence of physical intimacy. But as steadfast as I tried to be, doubt began to creep into my mind. Was I strengthening our bond, or was I unknowingly building a wall that neither of us would know how to tear down? When I refused him again that night, this time with more resolve, his reaction was more apparent. A fleeting shadow of irritation crossed his face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. He didn't speak immediately, choosing instead to climb into bed with a noticeable stiffness in his movements. "Why, babe?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. This was the moment I had been anticipating, the moment I would have to lay my vulnerability bare. "I'm testing you," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Testing me?" His tone held a mix of confusion and something else, hurt, perhaps. "Yes," I admitted, meeting his gaze. "I want to see if you still love me when I'm not giving you what you want." For a long time, Tun didn't respond. The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged, each second amplifying the tension. My pulse quickened as I waited, wondering how he would react. Would he feel betrayed? Would he understand my reasoning? Finally, he spoke, his voice gentler than I expected. "I don't need you to test me, babe. I love you, but I also want you. I can't help that. And I miss you." His honesty was disarming. I let out a sigh, a mixture of relief and unease. "I just needed to know," I murmured, "to know that you could love me beyond that, even when I say no." "I do love you," he said, his hand reaching out to cover mine. His touch was warm, grounding. "But I won't lie, it's hard. Not having that intimacy with you. It's hard." By the fourth day, the consequences of my actions began to weigh heavily on me. Denying him had created a strange rift between us, a gap that wasn't just physical but emotional. It wasn't as though we didn't love each other. Our love was still there, steadfast and real, but it was being tested in ways neither of us had anticipated. And as I looked at Tund, his quiet strength juxtaposed with the longing in his eyes, I began to wonder, was this test proving our love, or was it pushing us further apart? Thank you for taking the time to watch our videos. If you find the content useful and interesting, don't forget to like, share, and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. Our channel will always update attractive, inspiring, and useful content for you. Click the bell icon to receive notifications as soon as there are new videos. Your support is the biggest motivation for us to continue to develop. Thank you and see you in the next videos.